Mr. B's, Mr. B's, Mr. B's History. Now then, people, today we're going to have a relatively in-depth study of the 2025 AQA Historic Environment. And for 2025, that is Hardwick Hall. You may know it as Hardwick Hall, more glass and wall. It is a famous example, a classic example of an Elizabethan prodigy house. I really have difficulty saying that. And one of those sorts of houses, definitely as defined by Ayres, is a noble's palace of an awesome scale. Okay, now some of you would have had the chance to visit Hardwick Hall. Some of you wouldn't, no matter if you don't, because AQA provides a booklet with all the stuff you need to know. As this is the only guaranteed topic and question in all of AQA's GCSE history papers, you need to focus on the contents of that booklet. And we'll work through a lot of it today, hopefully be useful, and at the end we'll probably try and just do a possible question. Let's crack on. Okay, so for this historic environment, for Hardwick Hall, for 2025, you need to know various things about this house and how it applies to other areas. So you need to know how it represents change across the Elizabethan period, how it represents in some way, shape or form continuity, things that stayed the same, how it might inform people saying about why it was built, the causation, or what were the consequences of such a development. You need to know about the context, what's going on at the time, what are the general themes going on in Elizabethan England, the Golden Age, etc., etc. You need to know key features of the site. So if I said the word loggia or loggia to you, you know what it means, people. If you don't, read that booklet. And then how does it connect to other things going on at the time? How does it illustrate? How is it an example of all the things that were going on about how people lived at the time, how were they governed, what their beliefs and what their values were? So what do you need to know about Hardwick Hall? Well, you need to know about its location. Hardwick Hall, Hardwick, Derbyshire. You need to know about its function, what was it there for, what did it do, and the different features of its structure. You need to know a little bit about the people connected with the site, and there are two people here. One is the devastatingly attractive woman in the top right hand corner of this slide, which is Bess of Hardwick, and the architect designer Robert Smithson. How does the design reflect culture, the values and fashions of the time? If you think about it, I like to think of these palaces as the equivalent of asking in the early 21st century, if you were to say, what are the features of a lifestyle that a billionaire has, you would probably talk about an enormous yacht, and those yachts would have common features, although more recently you might talk about them having a vanity space program. And then how important are the events and developments from the Elizabethan period that are connected to the site? What does this tell you about wider Elizabethan England? So the main person to focus on is Bess of Hardwick. She's born in Hardwick of lower gentry stock in 1527, and she marries, we're not exactly sure, to husband number one, Robert Barlow. That lasts for about 18 months and the poor chap dies. No matter, husband number two, Richard Cavendish, comes along in 1547 when Bess is in her 20th year. Poor Richard Cavendish. 10 years later, in 1557, Sir Richard dies. As part of his will, she inherits the Chatsworth estate, which includes Hardwick. Then, in 1559, along comes husband number 3, please, William St. Low. Poor old William dies in 1665. Then along comes husband number 3, one of the most senior nobles in the land, George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury. You may have heard of him before as someone who becomes long-term prison warder for Mary, Queen of Scots. In 1583, Bess buys the manor of Hardwick, where she was born. And then she starts to remodel Hardwick Old Hall. Now, for a whole variety of reasons, some of which involve rumours about George Talbot and Mary, Queen of Scots, that Bess's marriage to the Earl of Shrewsbury has broken down by 1584. They are leading effectively separate lives. In 1590, George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, dies. And then the same year, clearly full of grief, Bess begins work on building the new and improved Hardwick Hall. And she still continues to remodel the old hall, which is where she's currently living, until the new super duper palatial Prodigy house, Hardwick Hall, is completed in 1597. And then Bess enjoys living in that house, I'm sure, for 11 years until her death in 1608. So Bess of Hardwick starts off as lower gentry. Gentry, remember, is people who have a reasonable amount of land, do not have to do a regular day job, but they don't have a title, they're not a lord or lady. And then she goes and marries 4 times. Each time the husband is wealthier, has higher status in Elizabethan society, and as a result, Beth becomes richer and more powerful. So much so that by the end of the Elizabethan era, she is widely considered to be the second richest woman, or in fact the richest woman in England after the Queen herself. So Bess of Hardwick, quite a life. So let's move on. One of the things we're going to study is this idea about how the location and the function and the structure of Hardwick Hall, this historic environment, informs a wider aspect of Elizabethan England. So Bess, it's built on Bess's ancestral lands. It is probably the most dramatic way of seeing Bess's relative rags to riches story. You've got the old hall, which she improves and enlarges, but then she moves to the brand new super duper Hardwick Hall. It's built on a hill. Bess is not a shy woman. It's built on a hill. It's to show off. It's to be seen from afar. The way the entrance snakes through and the house is revealed. And on top of the house, just in case you're not sure who owns it, it has ES, ES, ES all over the place on the roof, just to let you know that Elizabeth of Shrewsbury built this. Then it's about comfort. It's about comfort. If you think when William the Conqueror came over to England, builds Mott and Bailey castles. Castles were the main accommodation for rich nobles throughout the medieval period. But what you see in the Elizabethan period is the fact that rich nobles are now building houses without any defensive features, because the time of Elizabethan England is largely a time of peace. Okay, you don't tend to have huge windows, chimneys, no ditches, no moats, no drawbridges if it's an unstable time. So it demonstrates comfort and peace. It's also a display of wealth and culture. There's lots of ways you can show off you've got lots of money. One of the ways is spend it on expensive stuff like glass and chimneys, and show how cultured and refined and simply brilliant you are by building in the new Renaissance style from Italy. So it's symmetry. If you cut Hardwick Hall in half, it would look the same. You have new and innovative things like a loggia, this walkway so you can walk sort of outside but not get wet. Nice. So, in summary, its location, its function and structure basically proclaim Bessie's rags to riches. Say that out loud, show that she's wealthy, show that she's cultured, and show that England at this time is at peace. So another aspect of this historic environment study into Hardwick Hall is who are the people connected with the site. Well, number one, you may have heard of her already, Bess of Hardwick, Countess of Shrewsbury. She's the owner, the commissioner, the occupier of that property. Initials ES. Elizabeth of Shrewsbury are everywhere. So she is numero uno. Second one is Robert Smithson, designer. Notice Smithson's with a Y, not an I. He's designer and builder. He's responsible for the Renaissance style. It's symmetrical, more glass and wall. There's a long gallery, and then those things you may note on the screen now in red. There's an all-through great chamber which runs from front to back of the house. There is this loggia I've talked about, this walkway, where you can look out onto the outside but not get wet. And then, perhaps surprisingly, you have two more people. You have Queen Elizabeth. There is some evidence of a bit of a falling out between Bess and Queen Elizabeth, and in many ways she perhaps hoped to regain Elizabeth's favour. The building is supposedly, although I don't quite see it, to be built in the shape of an E for Elizabeth. There are tapestries in the hall relating to the goddess Diana, who is often equated with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth's initials are seen at various places in and around the building, such as on the fireplace, and Bess has a huge portrait of Elizabeth painted, which is still to be seen in Hardwick Hall, perhaps in the hope that Elizabeth will come on progress. And then finally, one of the forgotten women of Elizabethan England, Lady Arbella Stuart, who's Bessie's granddaughter, who does have a particularly strong claim to the throne of England. So when Elizabeth I dies, if the English nobility choose not to go to the Scottish James, then perhaps next in line is Bessie's granddaughter. And so perhaps you could almost say this is a building fit for a future queen. So these are the people: Bess, Robert, Queen Elizabeth, and Lady Arbella. Okay, moving on. How does the design reflect the culture, values and fashions of people at the time? Well, overall, first thing it does, it demonstrates the popular Italianate Renaissance style. We've spoken about it before, particularly this idea around symmetry. It's for comfort, not defence. Clearly, it's a very palatial sort of building, not so much a hall, more of a palace. Lots of glass, no defensive features. There are chimneys, so you're supposed to be comfortable during your stay. There's a long gallery, blah 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 blah. What it's designed to do, one of the things it's clearly designed to do, is to demonstrate the wealth of the owner. We've seen this by the regular massive use of glass, with ES around the roof, with tapestries, with chimneys. And if you look at many other significant noble male people in Elizabethan England, they all remodel or rebuild houses. So you have Sir Robert Dudley at Kenilworth, you have William Cecil building Tybbalds, you have Sir Christopher Hatton building a palace at Holdenby, which is calculated to have 123 panes of glass. So if you're wealthy, you build. If you're very wealthy, you build big, you build flashy, you build with glass. It's a demonstration of the culture of the owner. You have to show that you are up to date, fashionable, trendy with it. Hashtag Renaissance style. And so you build in similar ways to other senior nobles, and we'll look at that a little later. It also actually, the great chain of being, it mirrors society in many of the houses, not just Hardwick Hall. There are 3 floors. The 3rd floor is usually the domain where the servants live, and they support the needs of the owner. The 2nd floor is where Bess and her important guests visit, and the 3rd floor, if it had ever happened, would have been where Elizabeth would stay. In fact, Sir Christopher Hatton refused to live in his palatial house at Holdenby until Elizabeth came to visit him. Sadly, Elizabeth never came to visit him, therefore he never lived there. It just bankrupted him, which is one of the reasons why some of the tapestries in Hardwick Hall are actually bought from Holdenby House after the death of Christopher Hatton. And in fact, she got £3 knocked off the sale price because she argued she had to take time to get a specialist craftsperson to cut out Sir Christopher Hatton's initials or identification and replace them with hers. Again, similar to other houses, perhaps you could relate it to the Golden Age, but I'm not sure. I'm actually waffling on it, and I've said this already 3 times in a different way. Who cares? Moving on, my video. But also, it shows that the power and the wealth of the 2nd richest woman in England, built by Bess. It reflects perhaps important developments at the time, where you've got the power and authority of the female monarch, where you've got Renaissance ideas common amongst major nobles, and you've got this concept, as I've said earlier, of the great chain of being. So this is how, in a way, Hardwick Hall tells you a bigger picture about what's happening, certainly in the upper echelons of Elizabethan England. Okay, so the word I have a great deal of difficulty in saying, prodigy houses. I find it difficult when I say that word not to get fire starter out of my head, which is why it was on the first slide. I had to try and lance that ball. So, Hardwick Hall, as we've seen, symmetrical, lots of glass, lots of chimneys, lots of ESs, loggia, grand gallery. Okay, but there's a 3 next to it. I'll come on to that. Here's another one. Longleat. Very similar. Lots of glass. Very symmetrical. No loggia. Woollerton Hall. Oh look, symmetrical. Lots of glass, but it's got a number 2. The reason why we have these as 1, 2 and 3 is that they were all designed and built by the architect Robert Smithson. And this is the order in which they were built. And in fact, one of the things Bess of Hardwick does is she recruits some of the marble sculptors, I think they were Dutch, from the building of Woollerton Hall, and employs them directly to build the grand staircase and the fireplaces in Hardwick Hall. And then finally, Sir Christopher Hatton's Hall at Holdenby. You can see huge amounts of glass, symmetrical. It's a little more dated because it rather than has a loggia, it is built around 2 internal courtyards. It doesn't exist in this form anymore. That's why it's a greyish picture, but you get the idea. If you're rich and you're Elizabethan and you want to let people know that you've really made it, you build one of these. Okay, it's just a bit of fun. I've done a rough A to Z of keywords, phrases, various other things to do with Hardwick Hall. So I've tried to get most of the things in there with all the letters. You probably had much more than I would, but I hope you find that useful. Keep your mind occupied about it. Kept me occupied on a wet day. Okay, so let's cut to the chase. We might have to answer a question. Sorry, you will have to answer a question about Hardwick Hall and its historic environment. And there could be lots of different sorts of questions. I don't intend to go through them all. I just intend to give you a sort of flavour of one. Okay, so here's a possible question. I must state I'm not an examiner. I don't have psychic powers. I don't know what the question will be, but hey, bear with me. I'm doing my best here. So one of the main reasons for building stately homes in Elizabethan times was to show the wealth and status of the owner. How far does your study of Hardwick Hall support this statement? So basically what you have to do is to use Hardwick Hall as an example that would apply to other noble buildings, stately homes in England, and say, why was it built? So this is a causation question. Why did Bess have Hardwick built? Was it wealth and status? Well, people, what we better do then is start with ways in which Hardwick Hall supports this idea that they are built to display the wealth and status of the owner. Oh look, wealth. There's really expensive stuff in there. Significant amounts of glass, lavishly decorated tapestries bought from Sir Christopher Hatton's estate, extensive use of marble in fireplaces and the grand stairway. So they use the most expensive materials on a massive scale, a monumental scale, or at least a palatial scale. Where do we see the status of the owner? Well, you see it in the initials ES all around the top of the building. You see it physically in the comparison between Hardwick Hall, more glass and wall, and the old Hardwick Hall, which is now a ruin. That rags to riches story. Look at me, look at where I've come, says Bess. And this whole idea about located on a hill to be seen from a distance. So what you're doing here in this first paragraph is you're doing this idea, this thing around the fact that, yes, it is about wealth, it is about status, and therefore I can agree. Now, if you want to go further and add details from other significant houses in Elizabethan England, you can, but I cannot stress enough, if it's not in the AQA booklet, you're not expected to know that, and you don't have to do it, and you can still get full marks. I hope I've made that clear. Okay, however, let's move on. Hardwick Hall does not fully support the statement because it was built for other reasons, i.e. to show the cultured nature of the owner. This idea about symmetry in the building, the latest Italian Renaissance features, latest features such as the loggia rather than the more traditional courtyard as you get at Holdenby. So it wasn't just about wealth, it wasn't just about status, it was about that this person was a cultured member of the upper echelons of Elizabethan England. And there are other reasons why it was built. To try and gain favour from the Queen. Again, tapestries making reference to the goddess Diana, who's often associated with Elizabeth I, having an Elizabethan coat of arms engraved in the building, and also commissioning a portrait of Elizabeth. So it's not just about wealth, it's not just about status, it's about trying to curry favour with Elizabeth in the hope that she will visit on one of her progresses. Perhaps even during that visit she might embrace Lady Arbella as potential heir, which still, in the 1590s was a very current issue. Okay, let's get to a conclusion. So I've done one paragraph saying, yeah, I agree with the statement. Two sort of different. But actually what I think is I'm going to try and draw them all together. So, in conclusion, wealth and status were the main driving factors in the building of stately homes. And other factors such as adopting the latest cultural trends and paying homage to Elizabeth I were mainly other ways of demonstrating that the owner had reached the highest levels of Elizabethan society, which was the ultimate symbol of status and wealth. So these other things I've spoken about culture, about, if you like, sucking up to Elizabeth I, okay, they are other ways to demonstrate your wealth and your status, because Elizabeth wouldn't stay with you if you didn't have wealth and status. that she probably wouldn't stay with you if you weren't at least fairly cultural, as she was someone who could speak several languages and was keen on art, music and dancing. So there you go. This is how you could answer a potential 16-mark question. I hope you found it useful. I've tried to go through it as thoroughly as I could in the time allowed without going so slow that it would be painful. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. Good night. Okay, I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, then either leave something in the comments below. If you want more details, get in touch with me at my email address, which is mrbshistory1832@gmail.com. Good luck, people. Hope it goes well in the exam.